There are companies around the world that knowingly and actively breaking the law and ripping people off. Just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that it's not wrong. That's why I'm so happy to see the market growing in class action. I think it has the power to, swing that imbalance between the consumer on the street and, the big CEO who's puppet master of this hugely powerful corporation.
How do you see social justice? What does social justice mean to you?
Social justice for me is kind of hopefully working towards a legal system, and it's not there yet, that kind of from top to bottom and in all aspects of life reflects a degree of fairness and gives people the chances to enforce their rights and then make a practical impact on the lives of people in lots of different ways.
Polly Blenkin is a founding partner of the law firm Milberg London LLP. In 2022, Polly was a finalist in the Solicitor of the Year category at the Inspirational Women in Law Awards, and in 2023 she was the finalist for Law Firm Leader of the Year in the Women and Diversity in Law Awards. Polly was my lawyer in the Carpio versus Facebook class action, where I represented 1.1 million people whose data was misused in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. She has much to teach us about how the law can be used to protect ordinary folk like us against big companies and powerful people. Let's learn. Thank you so much, Polly, for joining us on the second series of the School of Social Justice video podcast. I'm really excited about this conversation because of my experience working with you and all the things I learned with you when we took on Facebook in a class action, holding to account for data misuse of 1.1 million people's data in response to the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So I feel like our students at the school can learn so much in regards to your kind of excellent lawyerly self and all the skills you've learned as a lawyer now as a partner of Milberg London LLP, but also as a person who supported the School of Social Justice personally. As I say, I'm really excited for you to join us, so thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to kind of start off with a bit about yourself and kind of, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm Polly Blenkin. I've been a lawyer I started training in 2011. So over a decade now, and I qualified in 2013. So started off doing transactional law, which was pretty soul destroying.
What's transactional law?
So that's kind of, so litigation is about people suing each other and fighting each other, basically. Okay. So it's adversarial, it's contentious. Transactional law is more like M&A, so a company buying another company, or, I don't know, advisory work and contracts, business law, things like that, how to run a board meeting, how to run a company, how to be compliant. Those are just a few kind of simple examples. But it doesn't have the snap of litigation.
Yeah, just your tone as well, describing it, very different from the way you describe litigation with excitement.
Yeah, exactly, and that's ultimately where I got to. I mean, it didn't help when I started out. I was at a firm which was kind of very, very corporate. Their biggest clients were financial institutions and big banks. So it wasn't really the kind of inspirational stuff, So I remember one evening, particularly, I was kind of reading this document that I did not understand, and trying to make it better and do the job I'd been given. And I saw the sun coming up at 6 a.m. and I was just like, what am I doing?
Wow. Yeah.
So I moved from there, and then I went into litigation, which I always enjoyed, and it's got a lot more character and personality behind it, and a lot more heart, and have specialised doing that, and most recently set up Milberg London in 2020, which is a specialist litigation boutique firm specialising in kind of consumer class actions. And I also sit on the board of trustees for the Adami Project, which is it's a charity that supports girls and young women in Sierra Leone that have got pregnant, and as a result of that gone through various difficulties that kind of manifest themselves in lots of different ways. But up until quite recently, there was a ban on pregnant girls being allowed to be in formal education. Oh, so if girls or young women got pregnant at school, they would be expelled, and more often than not, they'd also be thrown out of their home. So they were kind of thrown into this situation where they had a child, nowhere to live, extreme poverty, and I was part of a kind of founding committee who set up a charity to support those young kind of marginalised women and support them through a holistic programme of support and pushing them towards repairing their relationships with their families, getting them back into a supportive community and network, and also getting them back into school, setting up small businesses, whatever they needed to do to kind of become more confident and financially stable people.
There's clearly so much to talk about, and I kind of want to start first off with your view of what social justice is. I mean, you touch upon some of those things where people who are the most vulnerable in international society need support, need help, but also with your sort of lawyer work, there's casework to deal with, there's litigation to deal with. Would be great to go into the methodology, but first off, more generally, what does a lawyer like yourself see? How do you see social justice? Like, what does social justice mean to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. It's a big question, and I was kind of, Googling, what's the definition of it? How, does that fit with my idea of it, and how I suppose how I try and contribute towards achieving social justice. But I think for me, it probably comes down to, kind of with my lawyerly hat on, the kind of the legal system reflecting fairness, but also people knowing the mechanisms that are there to help them. I mean, particularly in the work that we do on the consumer side of things, and we tend to do kind of David and Goliath cases where you've got lots of kind of ordinary consumers who have been wronged in some kind of way, and there is a law that's been broken, and then you've got some big corporate billion-dollar company that is breaking the law and relying on the inertia of lots of people to do nothing about it. So I guess social justice for me is kind of hopefully working towards a legal system, and it's not there yet, working towards a legal system that kind of from top to bottom and in all aspects of life reflects a degree of fairness and gives people the chances to enforce their rights and then make a practical impact on the lives of people in lots of different ways. As I say, my area is more kind of consumer rights, I suppose, and financial services, but kind of that it bleeds into all aspects, employment law, discrimination law, Gender Recognition Act. It's been in the news quite a lot recently. There's lots to cover.
Yeah, there's so much, and that's why you're a guest here, because there's so much you've learned and and you're involved with. And I think what I like about your definition there is quite an active definition of social justice, where it's not just an abstract thing there. In order for it to happen, people need to be informed, and there's also then a responsibility of those in power to then inform and be transparent. And for a healthy justice system, it's clear that all folk need to understand what rights are available to them. And I think with the work that you and the rest of your team at Milberg are doing, fighting for, as you say, those Davids against these big companies, it's really interesting. I'd love to go into some of the cases later on. But for you, why do you think it's actually important to then make that happen? You kind of touched upon it, the fact that if you aren't aware of the legal mechanisms available to you to hold big companies to account or for justice to happen, of course, then that's quite an unfair world we live in. But for you, why do you think people who are watching should kind of even care about achieving social justice?
I mean, I think it's really important. In my particular sphere, I mean, we get a lot of, the class action regime is quite a new thing. It's
Can you describe what a class action is?
So it's, class action is kind of an American term, your kind of Erin Brockovich style, where you are collecting a load of individuals that have been wronged in some way. And though they might have individual circumstances which differ slightly, they have a thread running through all of their experiences where they've been wronged by one particular party. And in those circumstances, there's a civil procedure rule which allows all of those people to team up as one and form a group and litigate as a group. And that's essentially what we do. So there's an opt-in regime, which is where clients need to actively sign up to something. And there's an opt-out regime where you just have one single class representative, as we did in your case, for example, and they're acting on behalf of everybody that is affected by that particular wrong. And so the kind of benefits of it is generally, by coming together, you're much stronger and you're able to achieve change and leverage a degree of pressure on very resourceful, powerful, rich companies, which you otherwise would have absolutely no opportunity or realistic prospect of succeeding in suing them. And even though you might have been wronged and they might have broken the rules or regulations or laws or whatever it is in that case.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the fact that it's quite an American thing, with much more of a tradition across the pond of class actions, and it's slightly becoming a bit more relevant here in the UK, and there's a lot more actions happening. And for me, having been involved as a class representative in the case against Facebook, it was just so eye-opening to see kind of how you could use the law to, in a way, represent and speak for a whole bunch of people who've had similar harms done to them by a big, giant, very powerful and rich company like Facebook. And
so I was going to say, and often people don't kind of, related to what we were saying earlier about kind of education, and in my view, that being a really important part of the social justice piece is not only the laws being there, but people knowing about them and then having the ability and the skills to enforce them, or being able to find someone who can help them do that in order to affect change. And ultimately what we're trying to do is that process, because a lot of people they think, just lawyers, you just want to make money, this is a scam. We still get loads of messages from people, this is a scam, I'm never going to get anything from you, this is frivolous, like this is all for your benefit, and things like that. And it's just not true. Like there are companies around the world that are knowingly and actively breaking the law and ripping people off. And just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that it's not wrong. And I think it's a really important part. That's why I'm so happy to see the market growing in class action and group action, collective actions, called lots of different things, because I think it has the power to swing that imbalance between the consumer on the street and the big CEO who's the puppet master of this hugely powerful corporation. And ultimately the cases that we do, we only do the ones that work. So if we're bringing the case, there's something in it.
I mean, I'd love to talk about that. Just before we go into the cases, one last question about yourself. So why have you, Polly, been involved in this stuff? You mentioned that you wanted to be a lawyer and trained to be a lawyer quite from the get-go, and then you started off with transactional law and now litigation. But what was the spark? I mean, there's so many people out there who are figuring out what path they want to take in regards to wanting to make a difference. And that might not mean that they want to become a lawyer. It might mean that they love painting and they might actually do a mural outside of their neighborhood to paint someone who's a local hero to inspire other young people. Whatever skill it is. But each person would have had a reason as to why they want to do what they do. What kind of pushed you to become a lawyer and be in this space?
Well, I think it's happened over a long period of time, like the 11, 12 years that I've been doing law, and I've gone through periods of really not enjoying my job or not being satisfied or feeling like...
That's very honest of you to say, yeah.
Yeah. Not you, of course, Alvin. But, I'm thinking really, when I've had big banks as clients or something, and you're kind of, it feels like very abstract. You don't feel like you're close to the person. All the work that I've ever enjoyed, I think there's been real heart to it. And that's something that my team at Milberg as well kind of started to build and get momentum when we were at our old firm. Cases that there's a central story, and that's a very human story. We did a lot of cases where small business people had been wronged by various banks during the course of the financial crisis and subsequent, and their businesses went bust, and they had no idea that they were actually kind of missold these products, which had ultimately led to their businesses going completely pot. And that's your typical David and Goliath, and I just loved working on those cases because you fighting the big bad bank, and then you had this, just these really hard-working people that had built their businesses up from nothing, and were good at it and successful, and they were ultimately missold something that tanked a life's work of, their life's work and their kind of financial stability and their plans for the future. And most of these people, in their 60s, 70s, at a time when they should have been enjoying, 30, 40 years of really hard graft. And that motivated me. And I think I recognised that motivated me in a way that work I'd done previously didn't. And I think that kind of sowed the seeds for what we do now, which is very much kind of consumer facing and trying to get redress and justice and some compensation into the hands of ordinary people.
There's a lot of kind of symbols in there. I think that the driving force of the heart and kind of the passion, and also seeing real people being impacted and wanting to do something. I think clearly to be successful in the law you need to have trained, you need to be an expert, and effectively advocate for those who can't within that system. I mean, it would be amazing to now turn to the methods. So, of course, the work you do is a very particular way of achieving redress or to addressing some of these problems that we've already discussed. What methods can lawyers use to achieve social change or social justice, or to at least help some good things happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because, as I said earlier, like, the legal system isn't perfect. And
How is it not perfect?
I mean, I think there are times where cases have come across our desk and we can see that something's gone wrong, and you feel bad for the client and you think, yeah, actually they've been screwed over here and that's not fair, that's not right, but you can't make it work legally for whatever reason it is. So perhaps, rather than being an individual, it's a company, and only the individual has the benefits of the legal landscape that you want to use for that particular claim. Or, yeah, they've been screwed over, but the company that did it has now gone bust, so they've got no money, so there's no point. You're never going to get that money back. Fraud being a very good example of that. Often the money is gone, and by the time you come around to realising it, it's way too late. So I think that's a continuing journey for everybody, and lawmakers and policymakers, etc. But I mean, there is an enormous amount of legislation out there, and I think having the skill and the resourcefulness to follow your instincts. So when things do come across your desk, the law generally, it makes sense. So if you read the facts of something and you think, oh, it smells a bit fishy, or that doesn't feel right, or actually what they're saying, it sounds like something's not quite as it should be, then you need to keep scratching away at it and be resourceful and don't give in, and find the law or the regulation that is going to help you. It's not always there, which can be really frustrating and very ultimately quite sad when you have to tell someone, I'm sorry, this just doesn't work.
Yeah, so clearly a need for reform, for reforms in general,
Yeah.
and continual progress. And I guess part of that responsibility then lies with our politicians in Westminster, our policymakers, but also citizens to kind of raise awareness of those things that they're concerned about so that their MPs can advocate for them in Parliament. I mean, could you give an example of like a particular case? Kind of, you mentioned a few things coming across on your desk,
Yeah.
but it'd be amazing to kind of see, how something starts and how do you get to a point of success? Maybe an example of how you've been able to achieve change.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes me think of actually the Lloyd and Google case, which ultimately was unsuccessful in the sense that it wasn't able to go ahead and proceed after the Supreme Court judgment.
Could you describe to people what the case was?
Yeah, sure. So it was basically our client was Richard Lloyd, and we were suing Google for a data breach that happened kind of, I think it was 2011, 2012. Okay. Don't quote me on that though. And effectively, that particular data breach affected 4.6 million people, where Google had, without people's consent, adjusted the security features in their phones and was able to obtain personal data for their own economic interest and in order to drive profits in other areas of their business. It was around using a feature called the Safari workaround. And the case we brought was with Richard Lloyd as the class representative. And
who was the former director of the consumer
protection? That's right. He was affected by this particular breach, and what we tried to do is use a mechanism in the Civil Procedure Rules 19.6 to effectively bring an opt-out claim for damages for the class of people that have been affected.
And how do you translate a data breach with damages, which are then kind of, for people who think, actually data, what is that worth? Because that was often a criticism with this.
Definitely, and with your case as well. And it still is a criticism. How do you value that? And that was heavily debated during the course of the case. What's the economic damage? What's the distress? People didn't feel it. And if people didn't feel it, if there were no kind of negative or serious consequences, I suppose, off the back of it, then why does it matter? I mean, my answer to that, and I think that's still something that we battle with generally in that space, is it does have value. Otherwise, why would they want it? And if you think about all these services that these big tech companies provide for free, why are they able to provide it for free? It's because they're getting something from you. And that something is valuable, and that something is driving the profits in those huge tech companies. So that's how I try and kind of get people to engage with it. It's not tens of thousands, it's not thousands, it's not going to change your life. But going back to making a change, the only way that these companies are going to improve their corporate behaviours in a way that doesn't, breach rules that have been there to protect people is, well, one of the methods, and in my view, one of the best methods, is to go after them in the courts and to make them pay something out.
Yeah, and I think what became clear in working in the case, of course, is the fact that our data is being used to generate revenue. And therefore it does have a monetary value, and so many people were impacted, and in a way it was also about democratic accountability, so that folk with the power to do so can't just get away with it. And I think that was a really interesting side of what was an innovative new process. I mean, so what happened after that? So you're in the courts with Richard trying to make the case. What happened?
Well, so it went all the way to the Supreme Court as to whether or not the case could proceed under CPR 19.6 and how exactly it could proceed. And ultimately, the court decided that the way we wanted to do it, which was an opt-out basis, was not going to work, and it couldn't go ahead in the way that we envisaged. But the court did actually give some really helpful insight into what they thought was good about class action regimes, and also how a data breach case could succeed. Ultimately, it could be opt-out for a period, but then it would have to be opt-in. The issue with that is around the economics of running the case, because they're typically funded and lots of people have to get paid in order to make it all work. So the Google case was not one that was going to kind of succeed in that way. So it all came to an end, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate, and of course we were pursuing the Facebook case at the same time, and it meant that had set precedent for us and meant we had to stop. But what I think became clear was even just the process of doing it itself did put pressure on the companies, Google and Facebook, to make some internal changes. And again, an example of a method where pressure from outside can make a difference, despite it not necessarily reaching its initially desired outcome. I mean, for you, what were some of the positive things that came out of it? I mean, for me, there was clearly now there's this new group, Caller, which I'm sure you can talk about, where now firms are coming together to put pressure for changes, and that probably wouldn't have happened had it not been for, you know, the results of these. So, I mean, what were the positive things that came out from that pressure?
I think the awareness, you know, there was a lot of press attention, so people heard about the case, and it had a really big reach. You know, it was a globally known case, which had a lot of interest. You know, from academics, different aspects of the legal system, and I think it did a huge amount for the kind of the collective action regime in this jurisdiction, because it was kind of so notorious, and, you know, kind of suing such a big company, and it going all the way to the Supreme Court. You know, we had a win on the way, and that was appealed, and then it went to the Supreme Court for the final decision. So it lasted a number of years, and I think it got everybody talking about it, which, you know, talking about those kind of issues. What is data worth? Do I really care? Do people care about it? If they don't, why not? And also, I think it really, you know, going to change. Like, companies have changed as a result of that. I mean, if we look at Facebook, for example, now their consent and their privacy policies and how they, you know, alter privacy settings and all that kind of stuff is far improved than since the Cambridge Analytical scandal. They won't make that same mistake again. That's change. That's because they got sued, and that's because they had that liability.
I think it's a perfect example of, like, aiming for the stars and reaching the moon. Of, like, that's where we wanted to be, but progress happens slowly and over time. And as you said, the case took years. Yeah, and that's, I mean, that is one of the frustrations with the legal system. It's slow and it's expensive, and there's no guaranteed outcome. You know, you have to be a dog in the fight, and particularly being a claimant-friendly lawyer, you have to work extremely hard. To, you know, being a defendant's easy, you just say no to everything. The claimant's the one that they have to bring the case. Proactive. They have to do, you know, they have to fight. And, you know, that really requires tenacity and passion and resourcefulness and believing in what you're doing and keeping an eye on the clients, you know, who you're doing it for and what you're really trying to get out of the process. Tenacity, passion, determination, you know, all of those kind of characteristics and skills which you've mentioned. It will be great to know, particularly for aspiring lawyers, but also for people who want to learn from lawyers like yourself in their own fields. Like, what are the skills necessary to be a great solicitor and you know, a great leader of a law firm? Resilience. Okay. I think it's the legal world. It's a funny old world. Yeah. We're funny creatures. We are funny creatures. Barristers are different to solicitors, and then you get all kinds of cats. You know, that's just humankind, isn't it? Yeah. We're all different. But I think it can be a really difficult industry to navigate, because I think there's still quite a lot of work to do on diversity and access.
I think
the numbers are really bad.
The numbers are bad. I think that's fair. And also there's also a lot to do in kind of females and women as well.
Yeah.
I think the numbers aren't great towards the senior end. They're great at the junior end. You get a lot of, I think, more women these days going into law than men, but they don't make it to the top because usually, because they have other pressures in their life. Is
that the driving force? I mean, look, I'm really fortunate that we've worked together and you're now a partner at Milberg. I mean, why is that happening, and what is causing the ceiling?
I mean, I think it's because women continue to be the traditional kind of primary caregivers for children.
Yeah.
Also, I think in my experience, when I've talked to people, not everybody wants to make the sacrifices that you have to make in order to make it to the top. It's pretty grueling in the private
sector. It's like a choice in life, isn't it? What do you prioritise?
Exactly. I mean, I'm really fortunate because I've managed to kind of carve out this little world where we've got a very fun, caring team, and it's a small team, and we're trying to carve out our own culture and learn from learn from the mistakes that people made with us that we didn't enjoy, or that hurt us, or whatever it is. But I mean, it's hard because it's a tough industry. It requires a lot of, I think resilience is probably the big one, but also I think playing to your strengths.
Okay.
We have a great mix of skills and abilities in this business, and that is absolutely crucial to the success. I'm not a numbers girl,
Okay.
I'm getting better at spreadsheets, but it's not a natural area for me. Neither is kind of science. So we have a couple of cases where there's a lot of technical evidence where we have people in the business that have a scientific or a numerate mind, and they're just so much better at digesting, understanding, and being able to take those work streams forward. Whereas I'm kind of like, it just, that's fine. I'm good at other things, some of the things I do, my colleagues can't do, and they're completely stumped by it. So I think it's okay to play to your strengths and not be good at everything. And actually, I think to be a really good lawyer, you have to have a good change maker in any kind of industry. I think you have to have a really good sense of what your strengths are, play to those strengths, and then to the extent you've got weaknesses in your armory, then build a great team around you that complement what you can do. Yeah,
I think one of the things that brings you and I together is the fact that we both love football. One of the things that makes us mortal enemies is the fact that you support United. And looking at a Cantona, which I always see every time I'm here, and one day I will bring it down as a Liverpool fan. But that's exactly it, isn't it? Within a team, you can't have a team of all Cantonas. You've got to have a team of different skills.
All the best teams in the world in any kind of area. It's that mix, that blend, which can cause tensions. Depends what the context is, but ultimately, learning to kind of hit on all those different angles, that's how you really push things forward.
And I guess for people listening and watching, it's sort of figuring out where they play. I mean, they might not even be in a team, they might be in a bigger squad, they might even be in the wider club, to use to continue the analogy. There's so many roles that people can play within this world of trying to make a difference in society. But that's a great one. So play to your strengths. Kind of what other skills. Whenever I think of lawyers, I always think about the meticulous details, but also the ability to communicate, like, very well through, writing as well as public speaking and meetings and negotiations. I mean, what other kinds of skills and techniques do you think?
It's a good point. Definitely attention to detail. I think being a little bit of a control freak and a perfectionist is a really good thing. Obviously, you can't take that too far because you'll drive people mad. But that curiosity, I think, is so important. It never assume something. If you read something, never take it as given.
Okay.
Go check it.
Yeah.
if you don't understand something, go check it. Does that make sense? Okay, yes, it makes sense. I'm going to move on. No, it doesn't make sense. Why is it in that contract? Or why did that person say this when I know that actually this is what happened? That kind of curiosity and not just letting something lie, particularly as a litigator, is really important.
So not taking things at face value and being very critical, kind of having critical
a critical eye,
yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I think that's really important. And in that, that from the smallest typo that you pick up in a letter all the way up to actually spotting it, a massive inconsistency in some witness's account of an event which actually cracks the whole case open. That's just a kind of broad example of the scale. But I think from top to bottom, you need to be always striving for perfection. And that's what makes your letters punchy. That's what puts the pressure on the defendants. And it's that, that tenacity, I suppose, that I mentioned earlier, really wanting to go for it.
I mean, this bit about striving for perfection is definitely one of those things which pushes people to reach excellence. It's almost you need a vision of where you want to get to and then work your way towards it. I mean, what's the vision for Milberg over the next few years? Where do you want to be? And as a new kind of course, there's the US-based company, and this being a new, relatively new firm in London, what is the future of your firm, but also class actions as a means to achieve social justice?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time for our business and also the market. The kind of collective action legal market is maturing pretty fast. It's very buoyant. There's a lot of firms that are trying to do these types of cases. There's a lot of cases going around. We get people coming to us every day.
What kind?
With ideas, oh, I noticed this, is there anything in this? Oh, me and my mates have been affected by this.
Got it, yeah.
Oh, I bought some cryptocurrency, it's gone wrong. Is there anything that I can do? All sorts of, and there's a whole kind of market for it, which it's exciting because it means that people are recognizing that this is a great way to address something that's gone wrong, and they're seeing that these things are working. We had we weren't part of this case, but there was a case in the last few years that settled and done very well. People have got compensation. I think we're gaining a lot more credibility as kind of having the ability to deliver what we're promising. Something's gone wrong, you've been ripped off, you're going to get compensation, and we're actually kind of coming good on those promises. And I think for Milberg, we just want to be part of that. We want to keep pushing it. We want to be market leaders. We want to be the people that that consumers have in their mind when things do go wrong, and that they believe that we're going to do our best to get something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can provide testimony to the joy of working with you and your firm, and I think what you're doing, I mean, this is exactly why you're here, because I truly believe that the work you're doing is making a difference, and hopefully more folk who are watching this also even consider Milberg as a place where they can turn to if they have legal issues of that nature. As we kind of come to the end, again, Cantona's looking at me.
I put him there just for you, Alan.
Yeah, I know, place it there. Of kind of people in history or even modern day, who are there any examples of kind of campaigns or lawyers that you've looked to, and why? Like, just in terms of our mission is to train the next generation of Martin Luther Kings. Clearly, MLK has been a big inspiration to myself and people who are involved with the school, but also there were many people who marched with MLK and actually weren't necessarily the figurehead. The civil rights movement was a very diverse movement, and of course had many people involved. But I'm curious to know if there's like a person or a campaign which personally inspired you in your journey.
Oh, I haven't thought about that. I'm sure there'll be loads of people, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Okay.
I think I quite like to live in the moment. So, I mean, I read a lot, and I tend to read kind of non-fiction.
Okay.
Which my wife is always telling me that I should just read something that's like easy and light and stop. You know, going with the heavy stuff. She's right. But I think
fiction. What they say is like fact is about kind of, what was it? Reality, and fiction is about the truth. Yeah. Which I find interesting kind of delineation. But okay, so with non-fiction.
But I think I kind of live in the moment in terms of like I'm inspired by people I know and work with now. Like, I mean, my amazing colleagues at the Adami project, they're just they're incredible. The board and the program directors and of our local partners in the Bow district in Sierra Leone. You know, I'm just completely in awe of them and the work that they do. You know, I'm inspired by my colleagues here. I'm inspired by you, what you're doing. I think when I can't think of any historical thing. I just kind of think about all the awesome people that I'm fortunate enough to cross paths with at the moment.
I love that answer, because sometimes we forget what's right in front of us. Yeah. And often myths are created about people who are further away from us because we don't necessarily know who they are as a whole human being. And so I think that's a great message to leave people who are watching, just in terms of look who's around you. And actually that can be really inspirational to continue. You mentioned there the non-fiction side and books. Yeah. And clearly you're a very intelligent, smart person and a leader. How do you learn? What's your process of learning?
My process of I think I'm always learning.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
And I think just having an open mind.
Okay.
I think I would say that's one of my strengths. I would say that I'm very open to learning things from different people, from different walks of life, and my default position is kind of, you know, my default position is not I'm right and then let's go from there. Someone try pull me from there. You know, I might have an instinct, you know, oh, I'm not quite sure about this, but I'm going to go for it. Or I might have an instinct, I'm pretty sure I'm right. But I think I'm always willing to test that. And other times I just know I'm wrong, which is fine as well.
Accepting is a big thing as well.
I think being open and agile, really agile in thinking and agile in terms of being able to change your mind, and that not being something that's wrong or weak or shows that you don't know what you're doing. Just holding your hands up and going, oh, I got that wrong, or you're right, or I didn't think about that. That actually changes what we should do here. I think I like to think that I'm quite good at doing that.
That's a great way of thinking. I find that often the smartest people are the ones who just accept they don't know much, because then that pushes people to learn and to speak to folk who might know more. Do you have examples of like what that means on a very practical basis? So for example, for me, if I don't know, I'm trying to think of something which I had to learn about recently, but I'd, you know, check a term like you did with social justice, you Google it, you search for it, you see what's available, what's been written by others. Sometimes I write in order to know what I think. Like I only know what I think
that's interesting.
Once I start writing, because the process of writing in itself allows me to reason in my head what I feel might make sense. And that's quite a lawyery way of doing things. Really?
Yeah, because you know what we're like. We bloody, you know, we draft things up and down, and documents go round on emails, and you'll have 7, 8, 9 versions. But it's exactly the process you're describing. Okay. You draft something out, and you think that's what it is. Then you look again the next day, and you think, oh no, slightly wrong, and then, you know, the client will come in, or the barrister will come in, or the expert will come in and say something different, and you think, oh yeah, actually, I forgot about that document, or I forgot about that point of view. And then, you know, suddenly you're kind of 13 versions down the line and everyone's tearing their hair out, but you've got an improved document because you've put it down on paper and you've interrogated it and pushed it around and shared it with different people.
It's the one where the document ends up with not only one bracket V1, version 1, it's like V1 times 2, version 18,
exactly.
point C, dated 5 months ago, updated to today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of just saying, like, kind of learning through drafting, and accepting that actually the first one is not going to be perfect, and it's just the starting point.
Definitely, and I always say that to our juniors, you know, our trainees or our paralegal, and I remember this as well when you're like a junior, you know, doing the first draft of something, and then you get it back and it's just covered in red and it's completely changed. And what I just try and say to juniors, it's just like, sometimes like the only reason you've been asked to do something is to kind of get someone else thinking about it and to know what they don't want to do. So you're not wrong.
So, could you say it again? The reason why you do something is in order for someone to recognise what they do, what they think.
So to get somebody engaged with what they're writing. So you know.
So it's a conversation.
It's a conversation, exactly. Yeah. And I think senior lawyers and partners are kind of terrible at this, because they'll say, oh, you know, we need to do this thing, we need to do a memo for the client, or we need to write to the defendants about that particular issue. And they haven't thought it through. I do this. You haven't thought it through, but you know you need to do it. So you're thinking on your feet, and then you say to someone, can you whip up the first draft of that? And you haven't thought about everything that you should. But taking that first step and asking someone to put it on paper, then when that draft comes through, I'm like, okay, now I'm looking at this and I know this is all wrong. That's fine though. That's exactly what I wanted, because now I'm thinking about it. Now I know that that's not what I want to say. Oh yeah, that's spot on. Well done. Thank you. You've done this, you've done that. Oh, you've missed that, but that's fine. Let's pull it in. And sometimes that's your purpose, is just getting the ball rolling. You're not meant to get it right.
I love that. That in itself could be used as an analogy again of achieving social change, which often takes decades to achieve. And actually maybe the first few years are just the drafting process of like, how do we address racism? I mean, we're not going to address it in the first draft.
No.
It's going to take generations of renewal. Just, I guess, most relevant to the American Constitution, where, you know, sometimes things deserve change to go with time. But yeah, that's a lovely example of what you kind of shared, just in terms of what you advise your juniors. Time just for one more question.
Okay.
So, yeah, you described the fact that, you know, you're now leading a team of lawyers and you're bringing people up, you're mentoring them, you know, and they themselves will later do the same, in the same way those who taught you did with yourself, and helping teach you to, or share the learnings for you to get to where you are now. And what we're trying to do with the school is kind of pass down that wisdom to people who want to follow in the likes of your footsteps. What would you say to someone who's like a future, who wants to be you, who wants to be sat here, you know, 5-10 years?
Don't do it.
Don't do it. Turn away, run, do anything but law. No. What kind of advice and tips would you give for someone who might want to, you know, I say, follow in your footsteps?
Drop me an email, let's chat.
Amazing. There you go, you heard that. I'm so curious to see if that actually leads to someone becoming like a top litigation lawyer in 5-10 years. But that's the beauty, right? It's just like,
that's
just
the
chat.
beauty. Yeah.
Great answer. And I think, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, because, you know, we don't really get these opportunities to have these kinds of conversations, but I'm glad we did.
Who's going to win the league? Arsenal going to do it?
No, I think Liverpool, isn't it? No, I think we can still win Champions League. I think City will win, to be fair.
Yeah.
I want Arsenal to win.
It feels like the momentum's gone a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, what is it? Sunday is the big match, Arsenal City, or is it tomorrow?
I thought it was tonight.
Is it tonight? Oh, yes, tonight.
I think it is tonight. Oh,
All
yeah,
right.
I'm going to be watching that one.
This is going to date this interview perfectly. And when it comes out, we'll see. But I think that's one of those things as well, what brings people together, not only is serious talk about methods and skills, but also like stuff like football and things that are culturally relevant and things that kind of just bring people joy.
Yeah, never forget the joy and just being able to have a normal conversation with people and a sense of humour, laugh at yourself.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's definitely a culture I've felt here when you've done your celebrations on this floor, which has always been fun. Polly, thank you so much for joining us at the school. I've learnt so much. I'm sure so many people who are watching have learnt much. And I'm looking forward to hearing who actually emails you, because you might receive like either millions of new cases or millions of people who kind of want to follow in your footsteps, and that's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. This educational content is absolutely free. Why? Because our vision is a world where anybody, no matter their background, can learn how to make a difference. To keep going, we need your help. Can you become our next patron? Can you help us reach 2,500 patrons? I really hope so. Whatever the case, hope you learned something today, and sending you peace and love. Let's keep learning.